what I was taught, you're Black, you come from slaves, all your ancestors were slaves, celebrate Black history. But when I learned my ancestry, I didn't realize that, hold on, there's European people clearly in my tree. There's Spanish people in my tree. He spoke, French Creole. And I'm like, man, this is who I am. This is what could have been lost that I've now connected back to. And I was so thankful that I'm not losing the history. Even though there was a degree of separation for some time, I'm bringing it back together. Having answers to your ancestry will truthfully help you understand where you're going in life. Because to a large degree, I was lost.
Bien sûr, tu as faim là?
Mogeki?
Non. Tu l'as mangé?
Oui, on l'a mangé.
Et toi, tu
Ça
as
te
faim?
cuit.
Hi, my name's Danielle Romero. Thank you so much for being with me here on my channel where we talk about American identity and family stories. And today we're going to talk to a new friend that actually I'm just about to meet. I'm sure we'll be friends by the end of this conversation. But Aaron was adopted and he was trying to find his family and his family story. And it led him to going to Louisiana for the first time just a couple weeks ago. And it's so similar to my family experience. I wasn't adopted, but I didn't know anything about my family on that side. And I got down to Louisiana and I got some answers, have some more questions. But Aaron and I got connected because we have a cousin named Alex Lee. He's a genealogist for the Southwest Louisiana Creole Genealogy Facebook group. He's the King Creole. He really is. Go check out that Facebook group. If you think you might have Creole ancestry, Louisiana heritage, it all connects down there. And so I'm really excited to welcome Aaron on and ask him a little bit about his family story and what it was like reconnecting someone who had been adopted. So let's go ahead and say hi to Aaron.
My name is Aaron Thibodeaux-Betts. I was born in Beaumont, Texas. It's about 30 miles from the state line of Louisiana. I call Beaumont the place where people that left Louisiana and didn't make it to Houston because it sits in between. Uh,
Yeah.
so being born in Beaumont from about 5.5 to 7.5, I was in foster care in Beaumont. And I spent a little time in the country area called Cheeks, Texas, outside of Beaumont within that time frame prior to being in foster care. So I was able to get that country lifestyle and that make that connection into why hence I breed rodeo bulls today.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. Alex, our cousin Alex was telling me a little bit about that. I
Oh,
think
and I forgot to
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, he was telling me you're like a real cowboy. Can you tell me about like what you do right now? Are you like breeding them or what are you doing?
I breed rodeo bulls or rodeo cattle, cows and bulls. And one of the things that I do is I cross various genetics with other genetics. So I built a herd, which I call it quality over quantity. I have some of the most stellar genetics in such few amount of animals with the most world titles, which are actually 17 world titles in the last 30 years of the PBR World Championships. I typically infuse and breed, let's say the 2023, 2022 world champion, and I then cross it back with the stellar genetics that I already have that come from previous world champions. And that's how I even understand ancestry better to some degree because of me breeding animals and understanding the combining of genetics and, in a sense, families and bloodlines.
That's the coolest thing I've ever heard. I think it's so amazing how you have that knowledge and you can apply it. And it kind of probably goes both ways of just how things can be passed down. Can you tell me, how did it start? Were you on Ancestry? Did you take a DNA test? What was your first step in this process?
My first step in the process of finding my ancestry was having an idea that my brother and I were different, but understanding, okay, I'm the type of person that I ask questions. I want to know, okay,
Mm.
well, what makes this more deeper or what makes it what it is? So as I started my journey about 13 to 14 years ago, I took the Ancestry DNA test. Yes, it did open up and answer a lot of questions for me where I then figured out that my results came back about one third European, a little more than one third European, and a little less than two-thirds of African descent. So I said to myself, okay, well, let's look at this from a percentage wise. If we're talking grandparents, then that would mean that I overwhelmingly have person of European descent as a whole grandparent, and some to degree to a mixture of a second great grandparent of that African European, and then the other two would be African. But then also I do realize that within those tests that they're still gathering the information and putting pieces of the puzzle together.
How did you start this whole journey? So you said you were in foster care. What were you looking for when you started looking for your
Uh,
family?
so, and I'll send all the pictures, so you'll be able to possibly put up if you would like.
Oh yeah,
So,
I'd love to.
so being that unfortunately coming into this world, it was very a lot of different things that most people may not typically deal with for the average person. Which unfortunately, I had a mother that was, into different things that did not keep the kids and the family together. Unfortunately, taking that into consideration, it played a big role into how I formed my worldview. So from about zero, at the beginning of birth till about 5 and a half, I bounced around from various family members in the city of Beaumont and even outside on the country area. And one thing that has always stuck with me, even after being adopted, I was asking for crawfish because that's a part of what I remembered as a child, walking to the bayous, seeing the little crawfish, as they walk around, and I would actually use them as bait sometimes, and it turned out they were actually pretty good bait because I caught quite a few fish with them. But having that embedded in me so early, even after being adopted, it actually stayed with me. So I had an idea of these small things that I went through or happened that kept me tied in with the culture. So if I went to a relative's house, it's like, oh, we're having a crawfish boil. I'm thinking to myself, I don't know all the story yet of who I am, but I just remember I used to eat it as a kid. Oh yeah, I'm coming to this crawfish boil you invited me to. So throughout my life, I still did things like that. Had crawfish, or if I went to a restaurant, they had etouffee. I ordered etouffee. I ate boudin. I mean, there was a lot of things that I did that still may not been so direct living in Louisiana, but outside, I was still finding ways to connect myself to the culture and to that state. And so after even going in from foster care from 5 and a half to 7 and a half, we had various, things that happened. It was good in a lot of ways, but I have to admit there were some struggling parts because, some of the kids in the family knew I was not of the family. But for the most part, I was treated well. I have to admit, I was, but there were still emotional ties where I knew that when I went to church and I was referenced as, oh, these are the grandkids, or these are my kids, and I knew that this wasn't my mother or grandmother. It still hurt to some degree. I'll never forget. We went on a field trip one day, and I was in the second grade, and all the kids' parents, the bus got back late, traffic or whatever reason, and all these kids' parents were there, and they were running up, grabbing their kids, and as I was standing there, it hurt because even as a little kid, I'm like, man, these kids are going with their parents, and I knew that there wasn't the same option for me at that point. That the person that was going to walk up, I appreciated, but
Mm.
she was much older and a foster lady. So me as a 7-year-old kid, this lady is in her 60s or so, and I appreciate everything she did, but it was still always that emotional hurt knowing that these kids are getting picked up by their parents. They're running to come get them, grab them, put them in the car. So that's why, as an adult, I try my best to make sure that everything I didn't have from those perspectives, I give to my children because I'll never experience those things. One of the biggest things that I've learned along this journey is that growing up in Texas, I love Texas. I don't want anyone to take this the wrong way, but Texas history
Mm.
and Louisiana history may cross paths to some degree, but
Yeah.
to another degree, they are very different. And learning history on the Texas side and not knowing who I was and where I come from and where, all my ancestors, I looked at Texas history and I applied it so much to my life. Typically, my perspective is of what I was taught. You're Black, you come from slaves, all your ancestors were slaves, celebrate Black history. But when I learned my ancestry, I didn't realize that, hold on, there's European people clearly in my tree. There's Spanish people in my tree. So when I learned that, I said to myself, and I was a little upset, but then I realized within a short period of time, okay, let's understand. Your dad was not born in Texas. Your mother may have been born in Texas, but her parents were born in Louisiana, northern Louisiana, but they're from Louisiana. So then I realized that, oh, historically, in reality, Texas history applies to me as where I'm living now, but historically, for my ancestors, they were not here. So
Right.
being that they were not here, I then had to a degree, reprogram my thinking to understand that I need to get closer to where my family is from to understand where I came from, because what I'm being taught on the Texas side doesn't really apply to me. Being that 0 to 7 years old typically plays a big role in how we end up viewing things lifelong.
When did you start kind of having that question in the back of your mind of like
So
where is the family or who are they, you know?
So being that my brother and I were adopted together, we have the same mother and father. My brother is darker skinned. And growing up in the Houston area, kids would make jokes and they would say things like, and I'm going to be very open how I say this, which is, hey man, did your mom cheat on your dad with a white man? Like, why are you lighter and your brother is very dark skinned? And so as a kid, I didn't really look too deep into it, but as I got older and started to understand life more, I did wonder, well, how come some of my friends, the brothers and sisters all look alike, but why is it that in a situation like mine, why are we different? Once I became old enough and I ended up reaching out and meeting my family, I then understood how mixed and how culturally diverse we are. So that's how I came to understand how we come from different spectrums, from the lightest of the light to the darker to the in the middle, in between, so on and so forth. So understanding after meeting my family, I didn't realize that my second great grandmother is a Dominguez. So she comes from the what they call it Slaños in Louisiana, and that whole line of people she come from is that they came from the Canary Islands, Spain. And Antonio Dominguez is my fifth great grandfather, which he settled in the southern part down around Assumption Parish. Other great grandmother being a Broussard, and then I understood my Williams side, which my Alex Williams married my second great grandmother Josephine Dominguez, and I finally was able to see pictures of these people, and I said, man, these people look vastly different, and that's how I came to understand who I am and why my brother and I look per se to a degree skin tone wise different. But then I came to realize that the skin tone also is not the only determining factor. It plays a piece. It's a part of the puzzle that plays a
Yes.
piece that makes everyone and families who they are, and different in some ways, but very similar in a lot of ways.
It's so true. I was so excited when I heard and I saw the stuff of you going down Louisiana, and I want to talk about it and maybe put stuff up when I edit if that's okay to share, because I feel like I wasn't in foster care and I wasn't adopted, so you have so many other hurdles that you had to push through. But when I went to Louisiana to meet my blood relatives there for the first time, I was like so nervous. I was so overwhelmed. I was so scared that I wouldn't like be right. How did it feel when you found these people and went to see them a couple weeks ago?
So going to Louisiana, as I remember the drive, I was full of different emotions. I took my sons with me, but I was full of different emotions. I wouldn't really say more or less mixed emotions. It was just closing the gap and understanding and putting more pieces of the puzzle together to understand who I am and all the people I come from. And interesting, the elders that were there that I was able to meet, which are actually DNA matches of myself on Ancestry. One of the guys, he stated his name, and I'm like, you're you're like a very close cousin, like not distant, you're a close cousin. And when he stated his name, I was like, oh wow, that's you. And I showed him the match in the picture. He said, yeah, this is me younger, but yes, this is myself. And I was so moved and enthused because we share a decent amount of DNA. And to look up on him, he spoke, French Creole. And I'm like, man, this is who I am. This is what could have been lost that I've now connected back to. And I was so thankful that I'm not losing the history. Even though there was a degree of separation for some time, I'm bringing it back together. And also, I received a text message when I left, which one of the cousins stated, "We were so glad that you came. You lit a fire in this family again, and we're so thankful." And that did something to me because I didn't know how maybe they truthfully felt, and for them to tell me that, I was very thankful because it's not just me wanting to meet them; it's them wanting to make the connections also and to include me in part of the family.
Oh, I felt all those same ways. It was so crazy to be there because like you're doing the work on your computer, whatever, alone at your house. And it's like there's names, but then like to actually meet these people, like we share these ancestors. It felt so amazing. And so you brought your sons with you to this meeting, you said?
So one son is mixed with his mom is Mexican, and my other son is of Honduran descent. The native portion of
Hmm.
that region combined with Spanish, which then brings a whole new element for him as who he is as a kid and as a man that he'll come to be.
How did you prepare them to be like, we're gonna go meet these people? Like what were they asking you about on the way there?
So my son interestingly met my father for the first time on this trip. So that
Oh,
was very important to me. And my son, he understands a lot. The oldest one is 13, so he understood that I've shared all the pictures with him. And interestingly, when him being younger, he's like, "Oh, Dad, I see these dates. These people are so old." And it's like him being a kid and trying to
yeah.
understand, but he understands who we are, where we come from on my side, because I share that with them constantly. And also the last names are vastly different. And that's one of the things that I love about the people of Louisiana, especially that come from the regional parts that have that Cajun Creole influence. You see the last names Thibodeaux, Arsenault, Babineau, all these different names that make that state and the people who they are. But once you cross over to the Texas side, it becomes vastly different. So when they meet people with those names, they start asking questions and they're very interested of how do you have a name with EAUX, or how are you maybe appear to be of African American descent, to depending on the view of the person, but you have a
Okay.
Spanish last name or French or a name that is not as common as maybe like a Smith or Johnson.
My mom's grandmother spoke Creole as her first language, and nobody really knew it until after she had passed away. She stopped using it. Did you get to hear them talking?
On YouTube, as I go through and I search Creole Cajun videos, different cultural aspects, I've heard it before. So I found it very interesting. And to hear someone that I share DNA with and a family, a close relative, actually speak it, I then learned that this person actually teaches courses in Lafayette and around that area, Bro Bridge, to
Mm.
educate people that want to learn. So I found it very interesting that something that some people look at as a dying language or a language that is becoming less prevalent, to hear my family speaking it and it being an elder, it almost moved me to a point where I'm like, man, I speak Spanish and I would love to learn that language and make sure I don't lose it.
Bien sûr, tout qu'elle fait là,
Moquer qui?
tu les manges.
Oui, mon vais manger.
Et toi, tu
Ça
qu'elle
te
fait?
cuit.
Maman, il a marchou.
Machou.
Tu qu'elle marchou
Mais
pour manger.
parti grande que c'est
Parti.
machu.
But that is something that I think about, is for that state, for those people, for the history. I don't want to see that become in the several hundred years very non-existent.
Yeah, yeah. And you said something I loved so much. I just wrote a note, but you were talking about how the stuff was almost lost and there was a gap. And I feel like that's exactly how I felt. I think that's how a lot of other people who are doing this kind of work feel, where there's like a generational gap of like 1 or 2 generations where there's just no information passed down. People aren't talking about it. They're separated for whatever reason, whatever happened, until someone like you comes along and starts putting the pieces together.
Their grandparents. I look at the migration is one of the biggest things I look at. So you spoke of St. Landry. Some of what I noticed for the migration of my family is that they ended up towards that St. Landry Parish area, but that was the last stop of migration for them.
Mhm.
I look at a lot of records, they come from that Arnorville, Brobridge, St. Martinville, very heavy. So being that when I noticed that migration of them, that they then towards the end ended up around the Karen Crow area, Lafayette, Karen Crow. Then the next stop for a lot of people for economic reasons typically was Texas at that point.
Mhm.
So when you look at a lot of the last names on my tree, you'll notice you see like the Dominguez, great grandmother of mine. You'll notice that you see the Bergeron Bergeron, which then
Mhm.
connects to a person of color because one of the Badgerons had a child with one of my great grandparents that was, most likely either mulatto or of African descent primarily. But then you're combining two families or two people, two ethnic groups, which
Right.
then connects that portion towards the Cajun, what people would consider like Cajun Badgerons being some of the original Cajun people. So you're then fusing together. So I kind of look
Mhm.
at it as intertwining and fusing together of when someone of color and someone of European descent then had a child for whatever reason.
Right.
I don't typically get into maybe the negative part of it, but I typically kind of try my best to stay to the facts that whatever happened happened for whatever reason, but it created who we are as people today. And that's why when you look at Creole occasion by definition, culture wise, I did say to myself, well, I'm just as Cajun as Creole to
Right.
a degree because if I have this Creole or Cajun ancestors, then how am I not both? So
Right.
my belief is that we have evolved several hundred years later into people that are of Creole and Cajun with Creole and Cajun ancestry. That's my perspective of it when I look at the facts and
Yeah.
how we've evolved as people. We were once those singular people of these families, but then as they procreated years later, it created a mixture of both Cajun Creole in a sense together.
It's all tangled. It's all tangled up.
Yes.
And I have something similar to you. I have Canary Islander heritage too. I haven't really worked it out yet because it was kind of surprising. I was trying to figure out what was the most surprising thing to you about this whole reconnection process for your family.
When I discovered and I was trying to make a connection with who my second great grandmother was, and her name was Josephine. They call her Mom Josephine, I come to learn. But when I discovered and I saw the last name, I overlooked it. I said, I know there's some other Josephines in the area. I just don't know if the Dominguez would be her. I don't
Mm.
know. But overlooking it and still searching and searching, I had actually found the right woman and the right lineage. And I said to myself, once I made the firm connection, wow, this was really Josephine Dominguez. This is who. And then as I saw all the Armageddon, the Cavalleros, and the Lopez, and my fourth great grandmother being Josephine Hernandez, and I said to myself, wow, this is amazing. Another amazing discovery, or something that I was always told, your cousin is Tracy Spencer. And it's one thing to be told something, and then one thing to be adopted and not know and have the best family connections.
Yeah.
But then to finally have that person follow you on, follow myself on Instagram. And as I tagged her when I took this trip, and as she commented, and to realize that I finally made a true connection to a cousin that is very famous, Tracy Spencer, that was on the show Family Matters, that
Crazy.
is a prominent, well-known singer. That was very interesting also, I would say.
when you said this might be like getting into territory we don't know, but Broussard, isn't that Beyonce's mom's maiden name?
It's not her mom's maiden. She
Maybe it's her
was
grandma's. That's one
uh,
of her family
one of
names, right?
yes, one of her. I know that line pretty well. So Beyonce, if I'm not mistaken, her mother is a Beyonce. They use two different variations of the name. But yes, she comes from Eloy Renee Broussard, which then had a child with, I believe her name was Celestine, last name.
Okay.
And so yes, she very well connects to the Broussards, and to be and make a firm connection. Joseph Broussard of 1702, which married Agnes Thibodeaux, that is the common ancestors 100%
Oh,
that
wow.
I share with her or anyone with Broussard lineage.
That's so cool. It's so cool. I think one of the things I really have enjoyed about connecting to the side, because I didn't grow up with any knowledge of any of this. I just kind of just showed up online and to see how do people handle you in that group or whatever, is that I would say 99.999% of people have been so welcoming. Like you're part of the family immediately.
For the most part, majority of the people in my family are the people that I've connected with that may not be actual family, but they are of that culture. They have ties back to Louisiana. We share those common interests that bring us together. And I really appreciate that because for a long time, I thought I was one of the lone people that thought this way. But then as I met people, I'm like, wow, this is refreshing. There's other people that think and share these same values the same way that I do. And I appreciate that.
Oh, it feels so good. Could you give some advice for people? I've had people ask me for advice, people who have been adopted, and I don't really feel well equipped to speak on that or that experience or anything, but advice for people who don't know anything or don't really have a starting place.
One of the most important things I tell people is that you can never tell someone else how to feel. Uh, what I mean by that is we can form our own opinion of what we believe, and we may project that and say, well, hey, you were adopted. You were given probably a better life than what you would have. So you should be thankful and you should, look at things this way instead of that way. And I simply tell people, we as humans or people, you can never tell someone how to feel. You can give your opinion of how you believe that maybe what may help them, but you can never just truthfully outright tell them how to feel. So with that being said, my
Mm.
best advice to someone would be, from my perspective, knowing who you are, knowing where you come from, having answers to your ancestry, and having answers that connects all your dots will truthfully help you understand where you're going in life. Because to a large degree, I was lost. So with me knowing a lot of the stuff that I know now and still making discoveries, I would suggest to people that it can very well help them if they're having troubling times in their life. They're not understanding certain things. They're not understanding what make them, do certain things or be a certain way. Knowing who you are simply helps bridge those gaps, in my opinion. Interesting, I graduated with a master's degree. And one statistic I would share is that less than 2% of people that go through the state of Texas adoptive system at least graduates with a bachelor's degree.
Oh
Less
my
than
gosh.
2%, which is a state statistic. Then, being that I obtained my master's degree, my MBA, I said, man, well, if that's less than two, I can only imagine what this number may be, 0 point whatever percentage. So I'm very thankful of that.
I'm so impressed, and I think your ancestors I know would be extremely proud of you because what I really love to do is put myself in the context of the family story where I think a lot of times we struggle in this modern era of thinking everything's about us and it's like the main character syndrome. And I think doing ancestry helps with that because I can see what my third great grandparents went through and all the things that they had to push through to get me here. And what am I going to do to keep moving that forward?
And I would say also, my perspective is that if we as a society understood how diverse and how different the people may have looked on our tree, we would then appreciate and understand how much more closely connected we are as people. And I think that would actually help out in a lot of ways. For example, I oftentimes have conversations with people of European descent here in the Houston area, and one of the biggest things I do is I share my ancestry with them. My first great grandmother on my mother's side, my maternal side, was a white woman, and I uncovered her picture, and my mother and aunts and uncles told me we've never seen her. She died young, but we were always told that everyone told us she looked like a white woman, and she pretty much, she would look white. And so once I uncovered the picture, I thought to myself, oh man, I wonder how they're going to accept this, seeing this European woman.
Right.
And once I showed it to them, they actually, my mother, aunts, and uncles had never seen their grandmother, and they were so appreciative. Not one person pushed back, and it was almost just as well as they told me. They already knew once they saw it what they were told all the years. Your grandmother looked white. So no one ever denied. No one ever, once I showed them the records and the picture, everyone was accepting. And I appreciated that because I said to myself, I think that we as a society, if we appreciate everybody on our tree, we would be a lot better off and we would understand each other a lot more.
You said it perfectly. That's how I feel so much. And I think we would stop seeing other people as so different from us here. And I know America's a unique country, but I think in that uniqueness, that's part of it, is just kind of learning now the truth about your family story, your ancestors, and how we crazy connected we are. I hope it brings a lot of healing. I really do. I think we need healing on a family level for a lot of these things, and we need that in a bigger level too. But it has to start with us, right, in our family, and that's where it starts.
I'll give an interesting scenario really quick.
Yeah.
Being that I breed cattle, for example, there's different terms that in the cattle industry people use. You have F1s, first generation crosses. So I said to myself, well, in the cattle industry, in the United States, people will breed cattle, they will cross them to get those genetics, which they call superior genetics of both different breeds, combine them, and then you may have, these different types of breeds that come about. But I said to myself, wow, the society and country looks at these cattle as being mixed, but when it comes to humans, it's the same concept. But why? What makes it so different that people have a problem with it? And I believe that it's the social perspective inside of it that has, over the years, determined and placed people in these boxes. And then people form these beliefs of what people are. But again, some cattle are just as well mixed. And they have registries for these cattle that are of mixed breeds. But it's the same concept as humans. Why can't we give it the same acknowledgement? And I use that analogy to simply explain we are people that are crossed and mixed the same way in a lot of ways to some degree. But why can't we look at it the same way as we look at the cattle?
I like how you said that. It's like bringing in the strengths from all these things.
I actually added Thibodeaux back because my last name was changed, and I wanted something that will identify me and tie me back to the state that all my ancestors are from for the last several hundred years, which is very important to me. And everybody that will come after me, I want them to be able to get something and have something that's never lost. And I don't want them to look back and say, well, I was supposed to have a French name and I wasn't given one. Oh, well, great grandfather put in the notes that he was adopted, his name was changed, but oh, well, he added it back. Okay, well, that's the impression that I want to leave, is that I left with them something that was taken away, that was given back to them, which is that French name that ties them back directly to Louisiana. And as we're recording this video today, this is just another piece of the puzzle. When we're no longer here, that will help people understand and keep the culture alive for years to come.
I feel the same way. That's why I started doing the videos because I wanted to record what my mom's sisters remembered and my mom's uncle remembered and just getting it saved because I was so afraid that when you have families getting older is so awful because I'm like, so much is going to be gone if we don't ask and sit down with those elders and the family and record it and save it. So thank you for what you're doing.
And what you're doing is so impactful, Mel, that as I followed your YouTube channel and I've seen all the different things, or even the episode of Melungeon ties and ancestry. But I appreciate everything that you've done and everything you're doing and everything you're gonna do, because this is one of the pieces of the puzzle that will keep this culture alive, and you're playing a very big role in it. And I appreciate what you're doing 100%. Our ancestors would be very proud, especially knowing that the era that they lived in and how things evolved, and the fact that we are still talking about them and a lot of those people today. I think they would be very happy.